Marcus, look, Madam Eleanor. Whoever you are, this is a company matter. Your personal anecdotes about cookies are irrelevant here. I am the supervisor, and I have made my assessment. Eleanor Mr. Thorne. The person whose character you are so quick to malign the employee, you are so eager to dismiss without due process, is the very same person who a few days ago offered kindness and shelter to me, Eleanor, your CEO's mother. In this city of millions, a sprawling anthology of hurried footsteps and fleeting glances, could a single anonymous act of kindness ignite a comforting flame, or would it simply vanish unremarked amidst the bustling currents of life? The rhythmic squeak of Sarah's cleaning cart was a familiar soundtrack to the opulent silence of the Sterling Corporation's executive floors. Long after the important click-clack of expensive shoes had faded, Sarah moved through the deserted corridors, a diligent ghost polishing away the day's remnants. Her life wasn't a glossy brochure of achievements. It was a testament to quiet perseverance. Each swipe of her cloth, each emptied bin was a small step towards ensuring her younger brother Tom could keep his place at university, his bright future, a stark, hopeful contrast to her own deferred dreams of a small bakery filled with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla. Despite the weariness that often settled in her shoulders, a cheerful spirit danced in Sarah's bright hazel eyes. Sometimes, as she cleaned the vast minimalist office of some unseen vice president, she'd allow herself a small internal chuckle. Bet they don't even know where the coffee machine is. She'd muse, picturing a bewildered executive lost in their own domain, or she'd share a knowing smile with Maria, another cleaner on a different floor during their brief overlapping breaks. Mr. Henderson in 32B left a half-eaten donut again. Maria, she'd whisper, the man's a pastry serial killer. One day we'll find a chalk outline. On this particular Tuesday, as the city sky wept a persistent, dreary rain, Eleanor, mother of Sterling Corporation's formidable CEO James Sterling, made a quiet escape. Cloaked in an unassuming raincoat and a simple headscarf, she slipped out of the chauffeured car, Manobo, a few blocks from her son's imposing residence, a gentle rebellion against the gilded cage her loving but overly cautious son had inadvertently built around her. All she craved was an afternoon of unscripted normalcy, the simple pleasure of browse an old bookstore she'd read about a relic particulars, porticoloche, from a bygone era. But the city, indifferent to her quest, had other plans. The bookstore, elusive as a half-forgotten dream, seemed to shift addresses. With each turn she took her phone, her modern lifeline blinked a low battery warning before succumbing to a defiant black screen. And then the heavens truly opened. Rain lashed down, turning streets into slick mirrors, and a sudden gust of wind snatched her scarf, sending it sailing into the grimy embrace of a puddle. Eleanor, usually so composed, felt a prickle of genuine panic. She was lost, soaked, and her carefully planned adventure had curdled into a miserable ordeal. She huddled in a recessed doorway, a small, forlorn figure against the urban sprawl. Sarah, her shift finally over, clutched her worn umbrella, her thoughts already on the warm bus ride home and the calculus textbook Tom had asked for. It was then she saw her, a lady clearly distressed, shrinking against the cold stone. There was a quiet dignity about her, even in her drenched state, that tugged at something in Sarah. Without a second thought, Sarah veered from her path. "Excuse me, Mom. Are you all right?" Sarah's voice was soft, carrying easily over the drumming rain. "You look like you could use a bit of rescuing. Stand here much longer, and you'll be a permanent, albeit very chic, rainy season snowman." A small, tentative smile touched her lips. Eleanor looked up, startled by the sudden kind voice. The young woman before her had an open, honest face, her eyes radiating a genuine concern that warmed Eleanor more than her thin raincoat ever could. "Oh, my dear Eleanor," began her voice, a little shaky. I seem to have gotten myself into a bit of a pickle. I'm quite lost and rather wet. The city has a way of pickling the best of us on days like these," Sarah said, sympathetically maneuvering her umbrella to shield Eleanor as well. "Come on, there's a little cafe just around the corner. We can get you warmed up and maybe figure out your bearings. Hot chocolate, eh, Ladge? Elage for getting lost. You know, doctor's orders. Well, my orders anyway." Eleanor, disarmed by the girl's easy charm, allowed herself to be guided. The cafe was small, steamy, and filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and baked goods. Sarah settled Eleanor at a small table, then returned with 2 steaming mugs. "I hope you don't mind," Sarah said a little shyly. "I only had enough for one. But they do a lovely tea as well." She then rummaged in her bag. "And this my last cookie. It's oatmeal, raisin a bit crumbly, but it's got fighting spirit." She placed the cookie on a napkin between them. Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. This young woman, who likely had so little herself, was offering her comfort, her umbrella, her last cookie, all without a hint of expectation. "You are incredibly kind," Eleanor managed, her voice thick with emotion. They talked for a short while. As Eleanor sipped her tea, Sarah listened patiently, as Eleanor vaguely described her intended destination, carefully omitting any details that might reveal her connection to the imposing Sterling Corporation. Sarah, with her practical knowledge of the city's nooks and crannies, offered helpful directions. Too soon, Sarah glanced at the clock. "Oh dear, I have to run, or I'll miss my last bus. Tom, my brother, will have my hide if I'm late with his study snacks." She stood, a genuine regret in her eyes. "Are you sure you'll be all right from here, Mom?" "Yes, dear. Thanks to you, I feel much better," Eleanor said, meaning it with all her heart. She reached for her purse, then remembered it was likely soaked through and probably didn't contain much cash anyway. A habit from relying on cards and drivers. I wish I could. Sarah just smiled. "No need at all. Just paying it forward, I guess." She gave a little wave. "My name's Sarah, by the way. Take care now." And with that, she was gone. A bright splash of warmth, disappearing back into the grey, rainy evening. Eleanor watched her go, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. She felt for her head, remembering her lost scarf, and her fingers brushed against something small and metallic on the floor beside her chair. She picked it up. It was a little hairpin, a simple silver clasp adorned with a tiny faded blue flower. Sarah's clutching the hairpin. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. A deep, insistent curiosity about the kind-hearted girl named Sarah began to take root. This was more than just a fleeting encounter. It felt significant. When kindness is tested by power and prejudice, will it be strong enough to survive, or will it be crushed beneath the weight of assumption? The warmth of her encounter with Eleanor lingered with Sarah for a day or two, a pleasant afterglow in the often monotonous routine of her work. But the reality of the Sterling Corporation's lower echelons, a world away from spontaneous acts of generosity, soon reasserted itself primarily in the form of Mr. Marcus Thorne, the facility's supervisor. Marcus, a man whose posture seemed permanently stiffened by a sense of his own minor authority, had a particular talent for making Sarah's shifts more challenging than necessary. "Sarah, is that a smudge I see on the chrome of elevator B?" he'd ask, his voice dripping with a condescending sort of patience, though he was standing a good 10 feet away. "We're aiming for gleaming, not recently visited by a very small, very grubby poltergeist." Sarah would simply nod, murmur an apology, and re-clean the already spotless surface. Her colleague Rosa, a woman whose wit was as sharp as her BS detector, would often catch Sarah's eye later. "Don't you mind him?" Chica Rosa would whisper during a shared water break, mopping her brow. "His coffee's probably just bitter, because his soul is— I heard his wife makes him sleep on the sofa when he forgets to record her soap operas." Explains a lot. No, Sarah would offer a wan smile, though the constant scrutiny did wear her down. Meanwhile, Eleanor found she couldn't get the image of the kind-faced girl out of her mind. The small faded blue hairpin sat on her bedside table, a tangible reminder of an unexpectedly heartwarming afternoon. She was a woman of means and quiet determination. Reynolds, she said to her discreet and highly efficient personal assistant the next morning, "I met a young woman yesterday, a cleaner, I believe her name is Sarah. She might work in one of James's buildings. Could you see if you can find out a little more?" Very discreetly, of course. Reynolds, a master of tact, merely nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling. Any particular building, I'm not entirely sure." Eleanor admitted, a little vaguely. But she was exceptionally kind. She mentioned Sarah to James over their somewhat formal weekly dinner. "I had a rather adventurous day on Tuesday." James. "Got myself thoroughly lost in the rain, and a very sweet young cleaner came to my rescue." James, scrolling through something on his tablet between courses, looked up, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Lost mother. You should have called me, or Henderson. That's what he's there for." "Oh, it was nothing. Henderson could have solved with a limousine." "Dear," Eleanor said, lightly. "Just a simple act of human kindness. This girl Sarah even gave me her last cookie." A brief smile touched James's lips. That was good of her. Perhaps we should send her a thank you hamper. "Did you get her full name?" "No, just Sarah." Eleanor replied, watching her son. He was a good man, her James brilliant and driven. But sometimes she felt the higher he climbed, the more insulated he became from the small, vital currents of ordinary life. He nodded, made a mental note, and then his attention was drawn back to the glowing screen. The moment, and Sarah seemed to be dismissed. A few days later, a minor crisis erupted in the main lobby of the Sterling Corporation headquarters. An expensive abstract sculpture, a swirling vortex of polished steel that James himself had approved, was found with a significant ugly scratch marring its surface. Marcus Thorne descended upon the scene like a hawk spotting a field mouse. His gaze immediately fell upon the cleaning schedule. Sarah's team was on duty for the early morning sanitation pass in this zone, he declared to a junior security guard, his voice resonating with the grim satisfaction of a theory confirmed. Typical. No respect for property. No attention to detail. He didn't bother to check camera footage first, which, as it happened, was partially obscured at that specific angle by a large promotional banner that had been recently installed. He didn't ask any of Sarah's team members if they'd seen anything. He simply summoned Sarah to his small windowless office. "Sarah," he began, steepling his fingers, his expression one of profound disappointment that didn't quite mask an underlying smirk. "We have a problem, a rather expensive problem." He gestured vaguely towards the direction of the lobby. "The cyclone of commerce, as Mr. Sterling likes to call it, has been defaced. And your team was responsible for that area this morning." "Mr. Thorne, I assure you, we were extremely careful," Sarah said, her heart sinking. She knew that tone. "None of us would ever—" Oh, I'm not saying it was intentional. Marcus cut in magnanimously. But carelessness has consequences, Sarah. Significant financial consequences. That sculpture is worth more than your entire yearly salary. Probably several years, in fact. Sarah felt a flush of indignation. We didn't damage it, Mr. Thorne. I can ask my team. I've already deduced what happened, Marcus said sharply. Just be glad I'm not escalating this further. For now, his eyes narrowed. But any more incidents, and I won't be so lenient. Unbeknownst to them, Eleanor had chosen that very morning to visit James, hoping to perhaps gently nudge him about finding a way to thank that nice girl. As she was being escorted through a quieter secondary corridor that led towards her son's executive suite, she heard a raised voice coming from a nearby office, Marcus Thorne's office, as she recalled from a previous brief tour. And I expect a full report on how you intend to ensure such gross negligence doesn't happen again. Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting. Then a softer, familiar voice replied, tinged with a desperate sort of calm. But Mr. Thorne, we truly didn't. We weren't even cleaning near the sculpture when the damage could have occurred. We were on the upper mezzanine level at that point. Eleanor paused, her blood running a little cold. That voice. She took a few tentative steps closer to the slightly ajar office door, peering through the narrow gap. She saw the back of Marcus Thorne, his shoulders rigid with self-importance, and then her eyes fell on the young woman standing before his desk. Her head bowed slightly, but her posture conveying a quiet resilience. Dark hair, a simple, neat ponytail, and glinting subtly under the harsh office lights, just above her ear, was a small silver clasp adorned with a tiny faded blue flower. It was Sarah, her Sarah, the girl who had shared her umbrella and her last cookie. A wave of icy fury, an emotion Eleanor hadn't felt in years, washed over her. It was followed by an equally powerful surge of protective determination. This kind, gentle soul was being browbeaten, falsely accused by this pompous little tyrant. Eleanor's hand clenched around the strap of her handbag. She wouldn't let this stand. She couldn't. When the final veil of secrecy is lifted, how many truths will leave people stunned, and will justice finally be served? Marcus Thorne, emboldened by his perceived authority, and fueled by an inexplicable disdain for Sarah, decided to make an example of her. He wasn't content with a private reprimand. He wanted an audience. He convened a disciplinary hearing in a small, sterile conference room, pointedly inviting a junior HR representative, a nervous young man named Peterson who looked barely out of college, and Sora's immediate team leader, a woman who usually tried to stay out of Marcus's line of fire. The air in the room was thick with a syrupy, uncomfortable tension. Sarah stood before them, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her face pale but resolute. So Sarah Marcus began leaning back in his chair with an air of exaggerated solemnity. We are here to discuss the significant damage to company property, namely the Cyclone of Commerce sculpture, which occurred under your team's watch. A replacement or repair will cost at minimum several $1,000s, a sum, I might add, that the company is not inclined to simply absorb due to employee negligence. Mr. Thorne, Sarah said, her voice low but steady, as I've already stated, my team and I were nowhere near the sculpture when that damage could have happened. We were working on the upper mezzanine floors for the entirety of that designated cleaning window, a convenient alibi. Marcus sneered, but unfortunately, the security camera footage for that precise angle is inconclusive, blurry. Almost as if someone knew where to stand to avoid clear detection, he let the insinuation hang in the air. The HR representative shuffled his papers nervously. Sarah's team leader looked down at her hands. Sarah felt a wave of despair. It was her word against his, and his word carried the weight of a supervisor's title. Meanwhile, Eleanor, still seething from what she had witnessed, had made a quick, discreet call to her son's personal assistant, a trusted woman named Ms. Albright. She'd said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "There is a situation in Mr. Thorne's department involving a cleaner named Sarah. I believe an injustice is about to occur. Could you perhaps inform James that his mother is observing a matter of some urgency on the 3rd floor?" Just as Marcus was about to deliver what he clearly intended to be a crushing verdict, the conference room door opened, not with a tentative knock, but with a firm, decisive push. Eleanor Sterling walked in. Marcus, mid-sentence, stopped abruptly. He frowned, visibly irritated by the interruption from this unknown elderly woman. "Excuse me, madam," he said, his tone sharp with impatience. "This is a private disciplinary meeting. You can't just barge in here." Eleanor met his gaze with a calm that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst could have. "I believe I have a vested interest in this meeting, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and carrying an unexpected authority. "And certainly a vested interest in fairness." The HR representative looked bewildered. Sarah stared, her eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and a dawning incredulous hope. A vested interest, Marcus scoffed, regaining some of his bluster. "And who exactly might you be to have such an interest? My name is Eleanor," she replied simply, "and I am here because I witnessed your interaction with Miss Sarah earlier. I also happen to know for a fact that she is a person of impeccable honesty and kindness." She then turned slightly to address the room. "This young woman, Sarah, found me lost and distressed in the rain a few days ago. She sheltered me, bought me tea, and even offered me her last cookie, expecting absolutely nothing in return. Does that sound like someone who would carelessly damage property and then lie about it?" Marcus's face was a comical study in confusion and dawning suspicion. "Look, Madam Eleanor, whoever you are, this is a company matter. Your personal anecdotes about cookies, while quaint, are irrelevant here." He puffed out his chest. "I am the supervisor, and I have made my assessment." "Have you?" Mr. Thorne, Eleanor's voice was soft, yet it sliced through his arrogance like a scalpel. "Have you reviewed all security footage from all angles, including the service elevators and mezzanine access points for the entire morning? Have you interviewed all other personnel who might have had access to the lobby?" That's not necessary," Marcus stammered, a bead of sweat now visible on his temple. "The circumstantial evidence is clear." It was at that precise moment the door opened again, this time with more force. James Sterling stood framed in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Miss Albright hovering discreetly behind him. His eyes swept the room, taking in his mother, a stunned Sarah, a flustered HR representative, and a suddenly very pale Marcus Thorne. "Mother, James," said his voice, a low rumble that commanded immediate silence. "Miss Albright said you were observing a matter of urgency." "What is going on here?" Eleanor turned to her son, her composure absolute. "James, dear, I was just explaining to Mr. Thorne and these gentlemen that they are making a grave error." She gestured towards Sarah, who looked as though she might faint. "This young woman, Sarah, is the person I told you about. The one who showed me such extraordinary kindness when I was lost. The one who gave me her last cookie." James's gaze shifted to Sarah, a flicker of recognition, then dawning comprehension in his eyes. He remembered his mother's story, the sincerity in her voice. Eleanor continued, her voice ringing with quiet conviction. And now Mr. Thorne is accusing her of damaging that rather overwrought sculpture in the lobby, and is about to, I presume, terminate her employment based on nothing but his own baseless assumptions. She paused, letting her words sink in, then delivered the final devastating blow, her eyes fixed on Marcus, Mr. Thorne. Eleanor Sterling said, her voice no longer just clear, but imbued with an icy authority that mirrored her son's. The person whose character you are so quick to malign, the employee you are so eager to dismiss without due process, is the very same person who a few days ago offered kindness and shelter to me. Your CEO's mother. Silence. Absolute stunned, pin-drop silence. The HR representative's jaw literally dropped. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she stared at Eleanor, then at James. The pieces of an unbelievable puzzle clicking into place. The kind old lady. Was his mother, Marcus Thorne's face, underwent a series of horrifyingly rapid transformations. The initial arrogant dismissal of Eleanor curdled into disbelief, then morphed into a dawning, sickening horror, and finally settled into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The colour drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, clammy grey. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost, or worse, his entire career flashing before his eyes, and then imploding. James Sterling said nothing for a long moment. His steely gaze moved from his mother's resolute face to Sarah's utterly astounded one, and finally it settled on the quivering figure of Marcus Thorne. The air crackled with unspoken fury, and the deafening weight of revelation, the truth in all its shocking clarity, had finally irrevocably been laid bare. After the storm of revelation, does one find the courage to sift through the wreckage, confront the reflections in the broken pieces, and make choices that not only mend, but also rebuild on a firmer foundation? The silence in the small conference room stretched taut, thick with disbelief and the acrid scent of Marcus Thorne's imploding career. James Sterling's gaze, like chips of glacial ice, remained fixed on his supervisor. Mr. Dawson, Thorne James finally spoke, his voice dangerously quiet, a controlled calm that was far more menacing than any shout you seem to have a penchant for. Assessments. Perhaps you'd care to offer an assessment of your current situation. Marcus, visibly trembling, opened and closed his mouth several times. No sound emerging. The arrogant bluster had entirely deflated, leaving behind a shrunken, pitiable figure. Mr. Sterling. Sir, I can explain. It was a misunderstanding, a regrettable misjudgment. A misjudgment. James echoed, a single eyebrow arching. You accuse an employee of serious misconduct without a shred of verifiable evidence. You threaten her livelihood. You dismiss my mother. His voice hardened fractionally, as an irrelevant interruption. That Mr. Thorne is not a misjudgment. That is an appalling abuse of your position, and a catastrophic failure of basic human decency. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her son's arm. James, she murmured, though her eyes, when they briefly met Marcus's, held no sympathy. Sarah, meanwhile, felt as though she were watching a play from somewhere outside her own body. The kind woman who had shared tea with her, who had worried about being a rainy season snowman, was the Mrs. Sterling mother of the CEO. It was too much to fully comprehend. She felt a strange mixture of vindication for the clearing of her name and an overwhelming sense of unreality. Yet through it all, a quiet dignity kept her from dissolving into tears or succumbing to the urge to point an accusing finger at Marcus. She had spoken her truth. The rest was unfolding with a momentum of its own. James turned to the young HR representative, Peterson, who looked like he wished the floor would swallow him. Mr. Peterson, I trust you will ensure Mr. Thorne is escorted from the premises immediately. His employment with Sterling Corporation is terminated effective as of this moment. A full internal review of his past conduct will also be initiated. Am I clear? Yes, Mr. Sterling, crystal clear. Sir Peterson stammered, practically leaping to his feet. He and the team leader, who had remained a silent, wide-eyed observer, quickly ushered a now ashen Marcus Thorne out of the room. The click of the door closing behind them seemed to release some of the suffocating tension. James let out a slow breath, the icy fury in his eyes softening slightly as he turned to Sarah. Miss. Sarah, is it? His voice was gentler now, tinged with an undeniable note of embarrassment. On behalf of Sterling Corporation, and on my own behalf, I offer you my sincerest, most profound apologies for what you have just endured, and it seems for what you endured before this. Hearing, he felt a flush creep up his neck. His company, his name, was built on principles of integrity and excellence, yet this had happened under his very nose. He had been so focused on the grand machinations of global business, on quarterly reports and shareholder meetings, that he had become disconnected from the human realities within his own organization. His mother's simple story of kindness, now juxtaposed with this ugly display of petty tyranny, had thrown that disconnect into stark relief. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said softly, her voice a little shaky but clear. I appreciate that. Eleanor smiled warmly at Sarah. You handled yourself with remarkable grace. My dear. Later, in the calm, plush expanse of James's private office, a world away from the sterile conference room, the three of them sat. Miss Albright had discreetly provided tea and small, elegant pastries, though Sarah felt too overwhelmed to touch anything. Sarah James began leaning forward, his earlier formality replaced by a sincere, if somewhat awkward earnestness. My mother has told me in detail about your kindness to her. She was deeply touched, and frankly so am I. It's a rare quality, genuine altruism, and it deserves to be recognized. More than recognized, it deserves to be rewarded. He cleared his throat. Therefore, I'd like to offer you a token of our immense gratitude. A sum of... He named a figure that made Sarah's eyes widen to an almost comical degree. And of course, we would be honored if you would consider a new position within the company. Perhaps in community relations or guest services. Something that utilizes your clear aptitude for dealing with people, with a commensurate salary, of course. We could arrange training, anything you need. He looked at her expectantly, perhaps a little too eagerly, like a man unused to making such personal offers, and anxious for them to be well received. Sarah stared at him, then at Eleanor, who was watching her with a kind, knowing smile. The sum of money he'd mentioned could clear all her family's debts fund, Tom's entire university education, and even leave enough for a down payment on that little bakery she sometimes dreamed of. The job offer was a lifeline, a leap up a ladder she hadn't even known existed for her. It was everything she could have ever wished for, laid out before her on a silver platter. A wave of dizziness washed over her. This was the stuff of fairy tales, wasn't it? The kind, cleaner, the secret millionaire, or in this case, the CEO's mother. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. The money was tempting incredibly. So the job, too. But as she looked at James Sterling, a man who, despite his immense power and wealth, now seemed genuinely humbled and eager to make amends, and at Eleanor, whose gentle eyes held only kindness, a different thought began to form, a different path. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling. Sarah began her voice gaining a quiet strength as she found her footing amidst the swirling emotions. I am truly overwhelmed, and so very grateful for your kindness, and for this incredible generosity. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The money. It would change everything for my family, and the job offer. It's more than I could have ever imagined. She looked down at her hands, then met their gazes directly. But if I may be so bold, what I truly valued that day with Mrs. Sterling was simply helping someone. And what I've seen today, what happened with Mr. Thorne, it makes me think James and Eleanor exchanged a quick, curious glance. Instead of a different job for myself right away, or even the large sum of money, Sarah continued, a new resolve dawning in her eyes. I was wondering if there was a way to help ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to other support staff here, people who work hard, but whose voices aren't always heard. She hesitated, then plunged on. Perhaps a small fund or a better way for staff to report grievances without fear, or even, I know this might sound silly, but more training for supervisors on how to treat all employees with respect, no matter their role. She looked at them, a hopeful, earnest plea in her eyes. If I could be a small part of making things a little bit better, a little bit fairer for everyone who works hard behind the scenes, that would be the greatest reward of all for me. James Sterling stared at her speechless for a moment. Eleanor's smile widened, a soft, genuine admiration lighting her features. Sarah's choice, so unexpected, so selfless, hung in the air, a testament to a character unswayed by the sudden offer of riches, a spirit more concerned with systemic kindness than personal gain. It was, in its own quiet way, as stunning as the revelation of Eleanor's identity had been. Once sown, can the seeds of kindness, nurtured by courage and watered by genuine effort, truly blossom, cultivating a garden of peace and happiness, not just for one, but for all. James Sterling, a man accustomed to decisive action in the boardroom, found himself profoundly moved by Sarah's selfless request. It was a proposal that resonated far more deeply than any business strategy. "Miss Sarah," he said, a new, unfamiliar warmth in his voice that is an extraordinary idea. And yes, Sterling Corporation would be honored to support such an initiative. More than support it. We will champion it with you at the helm, if you're willing. And so began a new chapter, not just for Sarah, but for the Sterling Corporation itself. True to his word, James, with Eleanor's enthusiastic encouragement, threw his full support behind Sarah's vision. It wasn't merely a token gesture. Sarah, initially hesitant about her capabilities, found herself leading a small, dedicated task force. Her official title became Employee Advocacy. Lead a role created specifically for her, one she grew into with grace and determination. She didn't ask for a grand office. Instead, she spent her initial weeks talking to the cleaning crews, the security guards, the cafeteria staff, the very people she had worked alongside. She listened to their concerns, their quiet frustrations, their small, often overlooked ideas for improvement. With James's backing, a new transparent grievance system was implemented, one that guaranteed anonymity and prompt attention. Training programs on respectful workplace conduct, initially suggested by Sarah, became mandatory for all supervisory staff. A small employee support fund, seeded by the company and supplemented by voluntary contributions, was established to help staff members facing unexpected hardships. Sarah, of course, accepted a fair salary for her new role, enough to ensure Tom's education and ease her family's burden significantly. She also insisted on taking evening classes in human resources and conflict resolution, wanting to be truly equipped for the responsibilities she had undertaken. The dream of a small bakery wasn't forgotten, but it now sat comfortably on a future horizon, no longer a desperate escape, but a gentle aspiration. James, too, underwent a transformation. The experience had been a stark awakening. He began to manage, not just with his head, but with his heart. He instituted regular town hall meetings where employees from all levels could voice their opinions directly. He was seen more often walking the floors, not just the executive ones taking the time to genuinely connect with his staff. His relationship with Eleanor blossomed. He made a point of having dinner with her 3 times a week. No tablets allowed. They talked truly, talked about everything and nothing. "You know James," Eleanor said, one evening, a playful twinkle in her eye, as he recounted a surprisingly engaging conversation he'd had with a mailroom clerk about a new sorting system. "I almost didn't recognize you. Smiling so much, actually listening to people. Are you sure you haven't been replaced by a more agreeable android?" James chuckled, a sound more frequent and relaxed than it had been in years. "Perhaps your little adventure, Mother and meeting Sarah, was the system reboot I desperately needed." Marcus Thorne, needless to say, was no longer a part of Sterling Corporation. The internal review had unearthed a pattern of petty tyrannies and abuses of power that ensured his dismissal was final and unequivocal. Some of his former cronies, seeing the shift in the company's winds, hastily adjusted their attitudes, while others quietly moved on. The atmosphere within the company began to feel lighter, more hopeful. Several months later, Sterling Corporation held its first annual Employee Appreciation Day. It wasn't a lavish, ostentatious affair, but a genuinely warm gathering in the company's large atrium. There were simple food stalls, games, and heartfelt speeches. The highlight was the presentation of the inaugural Sarah Sterling Award for Workplace Kindness and Integrity. Named at Eleanor's firm suggestion, James had initially and awkwardly proposed the CEO's Mother's Helper Award, not after Sarah herself, directly, but in honor of the spirit she embodied. Sarah standing beside Eleanor and James as they presented the award to a surprised and tearful cafeteria worker who had gone above and beyond to help a colleague, felt a quiet joy bloom in her chest. She wasn't in the spotlight, and she preferred it that way. Her reward was in the visible changes around her, the easier smiles on her former colleagues' faces, the more respectful tone in supervisor-employee interactions, the tangible sense that things were indeed getting better. Later, as the event wound down, the 3 of them shared a quiet moment by a window overlooking the city. The lights twinkled like scattered diamonds, a far cry from the rainy, disorienting street where Sarah and Eleanor had first met. "You've done so much good, Sarah," Eleanor said softly, placing a hand on her arm. "More than you know." James nodded in agreement. "You reminded us what truly matters. Sarah, it's not just about profit margins and market share. It's about people. You've helped us build something better." Sarah looked out at the vast city, no longer just a landscape of towering buildings and indifferent crowds, but a place of infinite connections, a place where one small act of kindness had indeed ignited a flame that was now warming many. She smiled, a genuine peaceful smile that reached her hazel eyes. The path ahead was still long, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt truly bright. And so Sarah's journey reminds us that a single act of kindness, offered without expectation, can ripple outwards, touching lives and transforming worlds in ways we might never foresee. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many Eleanors might we pass by each day, and how many Sarahs hold within them the quiet courage to offer a helping hand, a shared cookie, a moment of genuine connection. Perhaps these seemingly small encounters are the very threads that weave the richest tapestries of our lives. This story truly resonated with us, watching how one person's integrity could spark such profound change. What about you? Did Sarah's ultimate choice surprise you, or did it feel like the perfect reflection of her character? We'd love to hear what part of her journey, or perhaps James's transformation, stayed with you the most. Your insights and reflections truly help us grow and craft stories that connect even more deeply. If you have any thoughts on how we could make our storytelling even more impactful, or if there's a particular aspect you enjoyed or wish to see more of, please do share your feedback in the comments below. Your voice is invaluable in helping us improve with each new narrative. If Sarah's story warmed your heart or made you think, please give this video a like, and if you believe this message of kindness and integrity could brighten someone else's day or offer them a moment of inspiration, consider sharing it with them. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss out as we continue to explore more journeys of the human heart together, uncovering the extraordinary within the ordinary. Thank you for joining us on this emotional adventure. Until next time, keep an eye out for the magic in small kindnesses.